But there comes that one time in your life.
We were working at a peace awareness training.
Estábamos trabajando en un entrenamiento de PAT
In Santa Barbara, California.
en Santa Bárbara, California.
And one of the people asked me a question.
Y una de las personas me hizo una pregunta.
He asked me about a symbol that looks like an 8.
Me preguntó acerca de un símbolo que se ve, parece como un 8,
called infinity.
llamado la infinidad.
So I told him,
Así que le dije,
this part of infinity was in the past.
esta parte de la infinidad está en el pasado.
I'm writing past here, so you won't forget that.
Estoy escribiendo el pasado para que no olvides eso.
This may get dynamic.
Puede ser que esta sea una dinámica.
And this part over here
Y esta parte por acá
was the future.
era el futuro.
Well, doesn't it make sense that infinity has to have a past and a future?
¿Tiene sentido que la infinidad tenga que tener un pasado y un futuro?
Then doesn't it also stand to logical reason that it must have had a beginning?
Entonces, ¿qué no tiene razonamiento lógico que entonces la infinidad tuvo un principio?
Does that make sense?
¿Tiene sentido eso?
Does it also mean then that it must have an end?
¿Significa entonces que tiene que tener un final?
Anybody home?
¿Están aquí?
Trick question, I know.
Una pregunta
You're waiting for
tramposa.
me to let you out there and they'll go whack, huh?
Una pregunta tramposa, esperando que me zafe y luego ¡guac!
This can't be infinity
Así que esto no puede ser la infinidad
if it has a beginning and an end.
si tiene un principio y un final.
So he said, why is that infinity?
Y entonces me preguntó él, ¿por qué es esto la infinidad?
And if it is
Y
infinity,
si es la infinidad,
where is it infinity?
¿dónde está esa infinidad?
Infinity is located exactly at that point
La infinidad está localizada exactamente en ese punto
where the past meets the future.
donde el pasado se reúne con el futuro,
Right there.
aquí en medio.
That's infinity.
Esa es la infinidad.
That's where we are right now.
Aquí es donde estamos ahora mismo.
Now, if you really got that,
Si en realidad entendiste eso,
you could just get up and go home now.
te podías poner de pie e irte a tu casa.
Well, then let's continue a little bit more.
Entonces vamos a continuar,
Because what is infinity?
porque en realidad, ¿qué es la infinidad?
It is nothing.
No es nada.
No. It is no thing. Nothing.
No es nada.
When we say not one soul will be lost,
Cuando decimos ni una sola alma se perderá,
we're talking about infinity
estamos hablando de la infinidad,
or no thing.
de esa cosa que es nada.
So if we're talking about
Así que si estamos hablando
infinity
de la infinidad
and there that is no thing,
y eso que significa nada,
what are we talking
¿de qué
about?
estamos hablando?
We're talking about the soul.
Estamos hablando del alma.
Amazing thing to talk
Es
about.
una cosa asombrosa de qué hablar.
If you don't prepare, then you get caught in the astral winds of karma and you become subjected to all those things that flow in and around those levels. When we are born, we're allocated a certain number of breaths, which goes to about 100 years. Sleeping, you use less breath. Meditating, spiritual exercise, you use less of the breaths. Sex, you use about 400% more of the breaths. Gorging, eating foods and avarices of the world, it's about 200% more use of the breaths. So it's quite obvious that if you engage in those things that waste your energy, you shorten the time you have in which to prepare the kingdom in which you're going into, and to go there and become familiar. I tell people, longevity is a key in which we work, because the longer we're here, the better chance we got of breaking through and getting all that familiarized, as this world's negativity is familiar to us. You see, there's a story told about an ancient kingdom where the rulers were selected and they would rule for a period of time. It was 4 years. And then they were sent off to this island. And on that island were terrible animals and creatures. And they'd just be killed overnight because they'd be put out on this island. Then a new person was appointed king. So one of these who knew he was going to be appointed king watched that. What he did is he took all the architects and he took over soldiers and warriors and went to this island where he was going to be sent to later on, and had all the animals killed off, and had fresh water brought in there, and beautiful gardens and beautiful palaces with all the comforts that he could ever hope for, wish for, imagine, placed on this island. And it was finished. And it was finished the day they came up and said, "You, my Lord, are no longer king. This, my Lord, is the king." And the new king said, "You are now banished to that island." And he got on the boat with his retinue of people, and he went over into paradise. He was a wise king because while he was living here, he was preparing for what was coming. Spiritual exercises is the wise king who lives here and prepares for what is coming. Baruch Bashan.
How y'all? Yeah, okay, let's see. Well, Lee and I were hanging out last night on 6th Street and Congress, and it seemed like there was quite a few writers down there. So in case you didn't know, there's a Republic of Texas convention, or is it a convention, a rally? Rally, okay. So are we going to have a game tonight or something like that? Or that's what I used to have when I had rallies. Yeah, okay. So I was telling the IHOP group, of course, people with the what, and so that's our offering that's still going on called Intention, Health, Opportunity, and Participation, or Prosperity. Okay. See, I come up with other meanings to the acronym. But in any case, I was sharing with them earlier today via this thing called Skype, where it's just the modern opportunities we have about being in Austin. And we walked by, I think it's called the Bat Bar, if anybody's been there. And then I think that was a hint, because the noise was going on, outside our window, because we're staying down there on 8th Street, and let's see, San Jacinto, and so that might give you an idea. And I thought, well, when is this noise going to subside here? And so at 4 a.m. it was still going pretty strong. But then around 5 a.m. it went kind of quiet, which I figured, okay, then they had to go somewhere like where bats go or something. That I figured there was some tie-in. I haven't quite worked it out yet. But so they're nocturnal creatures, or at least the large majority based on today. So it was a lot quieter during the day. So for those of you who are on the internet, my understanding is because of the IHOP, we don't have the bandwidth. And if you don't know what that means, so this part of modern life, do both this and the other one so it's live. So basically, we'll be putting this on maybe Monday, so maybe it's Monday where you are, or somewhere in the world. But we are going to make it available so then you can re-look at this if you want to through the MSI website. Would that be accurate? Okay. So anybody remember what it's called when you go on the website? Maybe it's recent activities or something like that. I'm demonstrating how much I know about the details of the workings. So there's that opportunity. And we're going to be back here tomorrow night for those of you who are, a lot of times I get to speak live, but then it'd be like, for the people online, it'd be like we were here last night, but it's really before tomorrow night now. For those of you who are on discourses, as I understand it. So there's that opportunity. So if someone's not here tonight and you want to invite them, be my guest. They might even be somewhere like Montreal, Canada, or something like that, because they could make it, right? One of the things I experience I'm doing these days, and it's kind of like making the rounds, and so I heard Carol mention that our founder, John Roger, passed, and sometimes I just like to check, what happens when you put your finger up in the air and see how the wind is. But is there anybody that didn't know John Roger has passed? Okay. Yeah, so that's been the case. So part of the rounds is I have people share their experiences. I had someone do that with me tonight, and it fills me up, just to hear what we've been bringing forward. And I guess I'll do a notice that Jackie's probably going to be doing tomorrow night, but I'll do a little one tonight. We are in the process of collecting stories of people's experiences with John Roger, with the Traveler, with MSIA, to give you the idea. And it's been very rich. And somewhere, I think there's still a website, or maybe it's a Facebook place, but anybody know what I'm talking about, where these stories have gathered?
There's a Facebook page called
Celebrating John Roger on Facebook, where a lot of these stories have been gathering over the last several months. So if that interests you, and who knows, you may want to contribute at some point, because every story is rich. And basically, I look at it, I do have some level of responsibility in my relationship to what all that is, to connect. And so it's like going around to the family, around the planet. So here I am in Austin since John Roger's passing. So, the reality, of course, is my view is it's stronger than ever. What's it? The movement of spiritual inner awareness. And that John Roger's effect, I don't know how to really measure it or tell you specifically, but I experienced tremendous upliftment and something I would call grace in my life. And people have been telling me their versions of this. I do see that we received a blessing spiritually, and I experience it as a clearing of karma, or whatever. My life got lighter. Do you understand that? Or whatever load I was carrying, even while in some way I picked up responsibility, because that's how it works, because of what he moved on to. So he's not here physically. It set it up so I moved into some of that physically. And maybe, I'm sure for the most part that makes sense, that there is a succession here. And it's something we have been finding over the last few years, really, references about what John Roger said about his passing, and how that would work. So there was information through the years. I think we've collected some of that. I don't know where to direct you exactly, but we have shared some of that information with the community worldwide if that interests you in some way. But essentially, there's been a plan in effect all along. So even before JR got what we call the keys, you see how this is an introductory seminar in effect? Because is there anybody here that's not on discourses? You never have been? Okay, here we go. Thank you. And then you're still in some way going, well, what is this? Or someone, my neighbor invited me to be here tonight, and who's this guy? Is it passed on? So I'm doing some of that we're in a succession that has to do with what John Roger referred to as the mystical traveler consciousness, and that someone holds the anchor for that, and that it is an authority of spirit. So it works very powerfully in what we also call the Holy Spirit, and we're not the only people that use that phrase. We also call the Christ, and we're not the only people that use that phrase. And what we do is, well, in some way, we often do, relatively speaking to us anyway, refer to the good book. This is a copy of the Bible. There is one up here, and sometimes I refer to it, so I'm just thinking, well, why not? Let's go. You ever done this before where you just open up the Bible and see what's there? So it says Luke 7:41. I just decided to see. I don't know what I'm going to read to you, but let's find out. So this is in one of the Gospels, those of you that know what that means. And in Luke chapter 7:41, it says, there was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him most? Simon answered and said, I suppose that he whom he forgave most. And he said unto him, thou hast rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, seest thou, woman, I entered into thine house, and thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since this time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. And he said unto her, thy sins are forgiven. And then there's a little later here, thy faith hath saved thee, go in peace. We're in that movement. So we work in forgiveness. We work in that consciousness of forgiveness that is the Christ, the one anointed to forgive. And I do consider it as a spiritual authority and anointing. It's a power of God. So God has the power. If we don't forgive, and there's somewhere else in the good book where it says, to the degree, to the measure we forgive, we are forgiven. Is there anybody here that considers in your existence you have no sins, you have nothing to be forgiven? We're all frozen now. Like, oh, wow, okay, I think you got me. Well, let's consider that to the degree we would forgive, to that degree, to whatever power you would forgive right now, you're forgiven. And that you too can go in peace. We're in that movement, and we partake in it, and we celebrate it also. And part of what I would say to anybody who's new is there was a part of what's in the story that tells us, this too you shall do, and even greater. And we're in that movement. We're in the progression of what would be greater. Not just us. I just look at it that we're participating actively. We're stepping forward into it, that we consider there are those who are sent of God. And, in that reference, so I'm kind of making references here that, Jesus acknowledged the one who sent him, and that we acknowledge that as well. And part of it is we just don't acknowledge it. We also give up praise. That acknowledgement is, we recognize what it means to us to receive and participate. But there are those who, let's say, would hold up that book and say, we're blasphemers, or we're not beloved of God, or we're not saved, or things like that. So I just want you to know that about what happens in the world, that it doesn't mean that others agree with what I've been telling you. So one of the messages from John Roger early on throughout, I don't remember the last time I heard him say this, but he often did say, don't believe me. I'm seeing people going, right on, yep, I heard that. I've heard it more than once. And one of his phrases was, check it out. I heard somebody say it here tonight. So there's nothing you need to believe. But if you don't check it out, it's not a threat, it's an opportunity. That you need to have your own experience of what it is. So belief doesn't really work in what this is. Faith does. So I'd say, well, faith works. But it also means that we need to come into demonstration that we're acting in faith. It was said, faith without works is dead. Yeah, someone's like, even in their mind, like, okay, I'll count that. In your mind, you said, it's dead. Yeah. And what does it mean? We need to put it into action, that we're demonstrating, we're following this movement that calls us into a loving. It calls us into a loving of our enemy. Anybody run into any mean, nasty, upsetting, disturbing people in your life? Anybody ever had anything? Okay. You mean I have to love? Exactly. This is that movement, that we're taking it on in the fullness of what it is. It was also said, go and sin no more. I don't know how to do that personally. Because when it includes what I think in here, I think it's in here, wherever that is that I think, there's a sinner in there. There's a sinner that gets in my mind, blasphemer, or whatever you want to call it. But thank God we're not responsible for what comes into our mind. We're responsible for what we keep there. I think that's our grace right there. And then we can still come to one who has that authority to forgive. And it's within. So you don't have to worship or make this one important, or anyone outside of you, that you have the living God inside, so you can go to this one and say, Father, I have sinned. Okay, Mother, I have sinned. Father, Mother, God, I have sinned. What does it mean? It just means I missed. Anybody here not had an experience where you missed? Misspelled? I saw the spelling bee the other day. Misspoke, misrepresented, the list goes on, missed. And the opportunity is that we come into correction, that we're all having that opportunity, and that there's one who has that authority to correct us and put us into line and make us new. That this is what comes from filling ourselves in the spirit that is whole and the consciousness that's anointed to relieve us, clear us of what we have transgressed and created as a karmic issue. What does that mean? It just means there's also a presence of being responsible here that we all have. So if anything, what I've been experiencing since John Rogers' passing is that we've taken on more responsibility. I certainly have. But gladly, because with whom much is given comes the responsibility. You probably didn't hear it quite that way, but it's expected that it goes with the responsibility, that we act accordingly. So I just see that the opportunity is for those of us who are practicing to take it higher so that we come into a higher demonstration of the movement of spiritual inner awareness. One of the things that I was saying often in the last several years with those in leadership with the movement of spiritual inner awareness, and I'm referring now to the organization. The primary reference for the movement of spiritual inner awareness is it's a movement of spiritual inner awareness inside each person, that everybody is in it. It's an aspect of who we are. But there's also this organization that goes with what we claim. So there's a presidency, in case you didn't know that, who you're new, and what do we mean by that? We have a corporate board. You know, I'm kind of like out of my league right now because I'm not trained as a lawyer or that kind of thing, but let's just say I've dealt with what this is. So we have a board, it has a president, and then we have a secretary, treasurer. I think it's a vice president, but anyway, I don't even track that part of it. But we have Paul Kay, the president. We have Vincent Dupont, I think, is the vice president. And then we have the secretary and treasurer, Mark Lurie. And so they're the officers of the church. They were appointed by John Roger. And then they hold the legal financial responsibility for the entire organization. So we have other staff. We have a few people in the room. If you're currently an employee of the Church of the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, just stand up for a moment. Oh, you better stand up, okay. So then you have Roger Wakefield back there, and he works with Network of Wisdoms, which don't hear that all that often, but that's the Now Productions. Then we have Angel Harper back there, yeah. Do you have a title? I don't even know what your title is. The travel coordinator. There she is. Sometimes the traveler coordinator. And then we have the ambassador of MSI, Lee Taylor Young. And I'm the spiritual director, so there you go. We have others who volunteer with us. We also call them our slaves, because sometimes that's the level of work we get out of them. And so we have some of those folks. And again, I just want you to meet them if you didn't know who they are. Right? I see them mostly in the back here. But any of you doing MSIA services, like aura balances, polarity balances, yeah. So then you see Bruce Rathburn. Wow, Rosenfeld, yeah, thank you. And then Celia Allen Graham as well. Yeah. Okay. There you go. So there's some of the practical side of what we're doing. But what I kept saying to people in the last few years is we're to love one another. Does that sound familiar in terms of the good book and what Jesus was saying? Anybody heard that reference from Jesus? I'm getting a few nodding heads. Love one another as I have loved you. We're in that movement. And I consider that's what we picked up. And if you're interested, John Rogers speaks in great depth of how this movement is directly connected into what Jesus did when he was here as the Christ consciousness, holding that office, and also as a mystical traveler consciousness. Which you didn't really say that. You'd say, well, I don't remember, is that in here somewhere or I said, hey, Jesus was talking about the mystical traveler consciousness. Well, let me put it to you this way, in so many words. And again, why would John Roger come up with that name? And I get to say right now, I don't know. I love saying that every once in a while because it's relieving, like, should I know? And in some ways, I just let it go. And then I find often that if I do that, I have the opportunity to come into the knowing. So maybe that'll happen here. Why was that term used? For the progression of what the Christ is doing in the spirit, in the way that we call soul transcendence, going home to God, claiming ourselves in the kingdom that's at hand. Like, what would it be while we're still here? And that's why I look at the teachings when you read them. Particularly in this one, there's a red lettered version here, and it's what was attributed. Notice how we get into controversy. Like, did Jesus say that? Well, who wrote this? Where did the print come from? Who was the witness? How do we know these words were actually spoken? In a way, I don't know, again. And there's another part where I don't think it's necessary, because the story itself is powerful. And people do have experiences. I have had experiences. Anybody want to say you've had experiences related to the story so that it becomes alive? In a way, it takes it off of the necessity to try to go get proof and evidence. If you start having your own experiences, then you can write the book. Like, there's a book of John, there's a book of Mark, Matthew. It's like, I could do a gospel. Consider you could do a gospel. That in some way you're living in a testament to your life and how it progresses spiritually. And if anything, I'd like to offer that up to all of us tonight, that we are in that. We're in a life that's a living testimony to the Spirit of us all. And there's another way of saying it, to the God of us all, to the source of us all. That we're in that movement and that we can activate it so it becomes more present. Then how would we know we're living in that testament in full? That we do love one another. Because how would they know you're my disciples? It was said in that way, or those who are following, those who are practicing, those who are demonstrating, that we love one another. And that's what I was finding kept coming forward to say in these meetings when they would occur with the leadership of this church, that's our primary responsibility, is to come into the loving of one another. Then we can talk about a budget, or then we can talk about a business plan. Well, first we need to get into the loving of one another, and if we're not getting into that, and I remember one meeting in particular where I declared in a spiritually agitated way, if there is such a thing, I'm going to claim it, and that I don't want to wait until Jared dies to do this. I'm going to do it while he's here. And I remember Paul K. Said, I think that's the most important thing, that what you just said is the purpose of our meeting. So we had this, and we had a one accord come in. And it was beautiful just to have that moment, because what was going on prior to that was not a demonstration of one accord. It was a demonstration of we don't agree. And in some ways, we don't even like it. Or should we continue? You mean that happens when you're in a spiritual movement? It does. And I mean, if you read the book called Acts, you know, so the Gospels are more or less about this guy Jesus and the people around him, and then what happened during the course of his life. More or less, you know, the 4 books prior. Then Acts is what happened after. It's the first book after the Gospels. And then there's some more, but of course, but if you look in there, is there a lot of agreement? I don't think there was a whole lot of agreement and clarity about what to do. I don't think so. So there was a lot of disturbance, and of course the Romans were helping with that, and I'm sure the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, they were contributing to agitation and whatever was going on that was difficult. And let's progress it. Let's just consider that we're still in that movement. So if you become interested in the teachings, in what we call the discourses, the soul awareness discourses, that's where I would really send you if you want to get to know more fully what this movement is in particular. I would send you to the discourses, so maybe I'm the first person that's telling you that. As a way of connecting, and it's also a way of coming into a direct experience of the mystical traveler consciousness, if you so choose, because we work with a consciousness that doesn't violate. What does that mean? You're a creator, you're respected as such. So if you say, I don't want any part of this, just consider it leaves you alone, but what does that mean? It goes silent, or it goes, what is it? It runs silent, runs deep. It's still present because it breathes with you, because we're really talking about something that is. And even if you say, but I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? The thing I don't know how to tell you is what I'm talking about. You know, that it's in your breath, that it's in your life. And how would we and could we wake up to that? And then what would it look like when we do? I've already told you that. We love one another. So if you want to mark, you know, how we are as a movement, as a spiritual organization, whatever you want to call it, group, then mark us by our loving of one another. Now, I used to do this with my kids. Used to. I think I still do, but I'm repeating the part that I did before. And then they'd hold me to it at times. Well, Dad, is this your loving? Is this... I wonder if the people you talk to, if they saw you expressing like this, would they think this is your loving? Anybody ever had somebody like that run the... Okay, I'm not the only one? Oh. Amazing. Well, one of the things I would tell them, and I told them many times, so kids, if you're watching and listening, I'm telling you again now, that you can always count on me for loving. You can demand it out of me. That my life has that purpose with you. Now, I want to say that to all of you. Do you understand that? But then you can say, but with my kids, I have the karma of it. So it gets really serious if I don't do it with them. Do you understand that? There are people you have in your life that God says, I want you to love this person. Do you understand? You know. They're often called mom, dad, your brothers, your sisters, and the list goes on, your children. And it's like you're assigned to them and they're assigned to you. I'm seeing some of this in the room. So it's here. You know, I see it here. Like, yeah, that's right, I'm assigned to this person. How'd that happen? Well, you chose in, even if you don't remember choosing in. You chose in. And then just consider in God's plan for us, we were all chosen. So whoever's next to you, love the one you're next with. It's in here. I don't know where to go chapter and verse, but there's some place in here where we are directed to love the person next to you. Even if they knock on on your door and there's a so-called stranger. And there are some of the movements, like when we went to, where was that? Was that Scotland? We went somewhere, I think it was Scotland, but we went somewhere and we went to a little church, not Roslyn, but we went to a church. I'm looking at Lee, because I think Lee, I think this was in Ireland. It was in Ireland. Now I'm tracking it. So we went on our own one day. And I think it might have been, I think it was maybe, was it you, Rosie, and Candy? Yeah. Okay.
I was there, but Candy wasn't.
Okay, so Rosie was there. Isn't that interesting that I'm pulling that story up? I got my witness. Okay. But there was, there was a wedding. Remember this wedding? And then we went across the street to this chapel. And they had the 12 stations of the cross kind of around on the grounds. And then they kind of had a garden, and they had a place in the garden where they had a little, like, just the smallest cottage. It was like a 12 by 10 cottage. And what it represented, and they had some scripture in display there that when the stranger comes, you are to love them because this is the one sent, so how you treat them is marked. And I was reading a form of the gospel that's in Aramaic. And it's around, if you ever get interested, you can read it in Aramaic. And my experience is it's quite powerful when you consider that I have to make sure I can do this. Okay. That it would be the mother tongue of Jesus. So then you go, I guess, okay, so some of these stories, if you look at it culturally, like I bet you there's some stories that run in Texas, and the rest of us who come from outside Texas, what are you talking about? What did you just tell me? What is that phrase? Like there's phrases, oh, okay, yeah, you're not from here. Because everybody knows what that phrase means around here. And you understand what I'm saying? So then when we read these stories, these parables, etc., that if we get to the Aramaic, often you find out that these figures of speech have meaning, but they don't necessarily have meaning in Hebrew or in Greek or in the other ways that the other tongues that were spoken. And often, as people do, there's dialects and people were speaking differences. But if you go in that part of the world, you have a responsibility to welcome the stranger. And you have the responsibility to love your neighbor. And the neighbor in Aramaic, that word translates to who you meet. Well, that opens it up. I mean, I have to love somebody I'm just meeting? And what if they're a liar, a cheat, a nutcase? So, how do I... And just to understand to the degree you love them, then that loving comes to you. And the degree you forgive them, if they liberate something that you thought belonged to you, or they make a mess of things. I'm in my humbleness right now, because I can just think like, boy, if you're looking at me like, do you hold this up all the time? I go, I don't know how to hold it up. So I said earlier, it's like, I'm a sinner because I just look at my life. Do I hold it up to the measure that I would want to? Well, thank God I don't see that's the point. It's just that we would come into correction. We would come into a redemption. That there was a guy, John, in the River Jordan, calling people into a correction, calling people into a preparation for what is to come. And we're in that movement. You know, we're in a movement that baptizes in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Did you feel that? So when you say these words, they're not idle and they do carry authority, because that's how I invoke them. And of course, I'm not saying I have some unique ability. It's offered openly that we all have access. And many of you are ministers. So if you're a minister in the movement of spiritual inner awareness, raise your hand right now. So those of you new, you can look around like, whoa, wow, you have a lot of ministers. Is it required? Well, if it's up to me, but it's not. It's just an offering of a blessing. Become a minister. How many of you are initiates? Well, again, there goes the hands. And then for that one, it depends on how you look at it. Because there's a level of what this is that as you meet up with the mystical traveler consciousness, and I'm saying it that way, and you meet up with it, you become initiated. What are you saying? Well, it's in the air. What are you saying? We're breathing the air of the mystical traveler consciousness. Just think about that. That oxygen holds its integrity, and I think is it inert? Is that the word for that? Okay, maybe somebody knows. But in other words, it doesn't change its molecular structure. And see, I'm over my head, so I have to kind of like pull this through, or someone just speaks it. So it retains, this integrity. And so we can be breathing the oxygen that Jesus breathed. Do you understand that? I mean, literally, the molecule has come into your lung tonight. And I just said it that way. I said, one molecule, one lung. And then try to hang on to it. Like, I want it. It's mine now. Do you understand it doesn't work that way? You have to breathe it. Well, I can get it to my bloodstream. So even there, it gets liberated. It moves around. So it's very reasonable. And it's not so much that we're talking about a man. We're talking about a consciousness of the Christ that's anointed. We talk about what's referred to as the Messiah. And then, see, then we're going to get an argument right there, right? Like, you can't claim there's a whole bunch of us don't think that Jesus was the Messiah. Okay. Well, flesh and blood doesn't reveal it. I get amen on that. Like, thank God it's not dependent on flesh and blood. It's dependent on what it is, and according to the truth of the living God who gives testament, who gives witness. But how do I know it's so? Have the experience. Seek it out. So if you want to find out if this is real and authentic, seek it out. Stay with it. How many of you have been involved since before 1974? Before 1974. Look at these hands. Mine's not up. Because the first MSA event I went to was in 1974, so I'm actually looking for who was in the room, who was here involved before I was, and I think there was about 7 of you. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean they're more highly evolved? Of course it does. Or maybe it says, someone says, I think they needed it longer, right? They're part of the remedial group or something like that. I think we're all part of the remedial group. And that we're back And one of the ways I look at this version of MSIA, I mean the people that are involved, and many of them have, like John Roger, passed on, it's kind of like a family reunion. And that's where it kind of gets weird. If you've ever been to a family reunion and you're not part of that family, or if you've been to a family reunion and you are part of that family, and they're still weird. Like, we're related? And you can look at that, and I often have at times. I've just looked around and go, how did we get together? What's the common denominator here? And in large part, it's been John Roger. And in large part, it still is John Roger. So I do consider we're in John Roger's family reunion. Now, there's one seminar, and Lee's pretty good at this, but this would be really pulling it out. But there's one that came through as a soul awareness CD teaching. And there was an audio sat where John Roger talked about when he was before he incarnated, came into the body this time in 1963. I'm talking about that part. When he came in, where he came from, where that John consciousness came from. There's a seminar, but I don't know what to tell you, but see, doesn't it make you curious a little bit? And I think in the last year, it's on there. It's the one we were playing for a while. Mystical Traveler Answers. See, I told you you're good. Mystical Traveler Answers. Last August? Okay. And if you're new to MSI, you can actually subscribe to the soul awareness teachings. It doesn't mean you have to become an initiate. It doesn't mean you belong. You can just be curious. And then you could go listen to this seminar, and there's John Roger talking about before he came into the body in 1963, where did he come from? And why did he come in? And what did it mean? And it was powerful information. And I had not heard it, in this lifetime before last August. So for me, it was like a big puzzle piece came in that explained a lot about how this movement formed through his leadership, through his life where he held the consciousness for about 51 years. Yeah, so that's the story of that part of it. And it is something that maybe you just moved right over the top of that when you listened to that seminar, which happens to me as well. I put it on, and then if you said, can you tell me what John Roger said? It's like, I don't know where I went. But in any case, I heard that part, and there's some other information there. But I could tell you that about many, many seminars, so it's not just one. But it is something you could access, and then once you are a subscriber, you can order. I don't know how many of the seminars, but it's got to be like hundreds at this point. I know that part, but what you could actually order. She said 6,000, and we're talking about how many hours or how many reference. But in any case, it's a tremendous amount of work. But that's part of it. So we have had scholars. I think I might have seen the book that James Lewis did, maybe called something in the light or Seeking the Light, maybe. Okay, but he came in not as somebody who's participating in MSI. He just came in he said, would you mind if I studied your group? And if I'm going to study your group, I'm going to need you to get me some information, some factual information. And then I want to interview people. I want to talk to people. And then he wrote a book. And there's another one, I think, that came out a while ago, not so long ago, with one of our ministers. So we have had that kind of thing done. And it presents an outside view of what we're doing. And, that's available to new people. Maybe some of you didn't know that's available, in case other people are curious. Anybody done a internet search on MSI? I have. It's all, what is it? what do they say about girls? They're pretty and nice, and then when they go around the boys, it's puppy dog tails or something, or sugar and spice. And then what about the boys? What? Snakes and snails and puppy dog tails. It's like when you go on the search, you're going to run into the snakes and snails about MSIA, about John Roger. I'll just include myself, but if you're wanting no controversy, you came to the wrong place. There's a great amount of controversy about what we do. And I just look at it as questioning and non-agreement and non-resolution. So it has that threshold. It's not a place where it's really highly approved. I mean, it is if we go spiritually. That's my point of view. But in the world, it's anything but popularly and highly approved. So if you want something like scandal, or if that's what you're looking for, you would find it on the internet. And then sometimes that's enough for people. They want something that doesn't have controversy or scandal, and I go, well, we have it. But I tell you how to resolve it, go get your own experience. And there's another really great part of what we do. You don't have to show up at these meetings. You all know that, right? It's not required. Even if you're initiate or ministers, it's not required. It's highly recommended. There's a responsibility. If you're a minister and you're not coming to a minister's meeting, I would want other ministers to kind of get in your face about it. Say, what's going on? You're not coming to the minister's meeting. Let's deal with that. And let's try to resolve that. And I've gotten in the middle of that stuff at times. What do you mean? What I mean is, well, maybe you change up where you do the minister's meeting so that you don't always do it over here, because that's not really convenient for some people over here. So how about you change it up so it moves around, so the convenience becomes easier. Or maybe you go to Louisiana for a minister's meeting. Well, why would we do that? Well, it's right next door. It's your neighbor. Well, there's only 2 ministers in Louisiana. So turn it into a happening. Like, we're all coming over, get ready, make sure there's plenty of food. Click. Well, that wouldn't be so bad, maybe. Well, we'd have to talk to the ministers from Louisiana, see how they feel about that. But do you understand that when we're family, we can do this kind of stuff? Oh, we don't even have to call, right? We're here. Then you hear several car doors closing, and it's like, how many are you? Well, just get the grub on, because we're hungry. We've been driving a long ways to get here. Well, that's how I like to think of this, is that we're family, but that has a good connotation. It has a loving connotation. It has we watch out for one another. And I see that regularly. Do I ever see friction amongst us? Of course I do. I'm sure you see it as well, because that's life. That means we have our differences. But we're called into loving, and we really intend to do it just as the Lord did it. I'm claiming that for us. Because he said, this too you shall do. I'm claiming that. And even greater. I'm claiming that. So why would it be surprising? Yes, we welcome these things. Just answer it, honey, and go, we're all here now, come. We've been waiting for you. The preacher's got a place for you. That we have fellowship. That's a word I give to it. And so we do watch out for one another. And sometimes we need to be reminded about that. Sometimes we need to remind, like, what are you doing to take care of yourself and watch out for yourself? so that part of it, you know, the cards and letters that John Roger got, I get those. But I was getting them before, if you ever wondered. Pretty much for the most part, I've been getting what people wrote to John Roger. It's been sent to me, you know, when I got the keys, but actually John Roger had me involved for many years in his correspondence. Back when I wondered, why does he have me involved in his correspondence? Like, this isn't my business, it's his business. I mean, they're writing to him. Well, I guess he had something in mind somewhere. And here we are. And really, you can come to me, I've been saying this in case you wondered. And I just look at it, it's not a burden, because as much as I know how, I pass it up the line. I put the burden into the Spirit for what I do. And often it's not something I could do physically anyway, what people come to me with as concerns. But it is something that goes into the Spirit. And so if you ask for the light and you ask for help or whatever it is, and some of you did that tonight when I was back there, that's right. I'm here for that, but so are you. That we're all here, in a sense, like, let's get into this. Let's share this. That's one of the blessings, is that we would share what's going on. And that's like for richer or poorer, for health and sickness. It's a kind of a regardless of the conditions, that we would love one another. And some of that loving one another does become a good talking to. Do you have a way of saying that here in Texas, like when you give somebody a good talking to? Maybe kick them in the behind or something like that. A boot goes somewhere. Sometimes that's what we need. You know, to realize, wake up. What are you doing? You know, that's a way of loving one another. And there's some of that if you go back, you just see those stories, and we're in that movement. Like when Jesus said to Peter, "Hey, Satan, get thou behind me." That sounds like a pretty rude thing to say to you. Someone who loves and adores you, and then you love and adore. But maybe in that moment, that's really what needed to be said. Like you're acting like something you're not, and you ought to realize that. So wake up. Because what you're doing somehow puts you behind, instead of we're walking together. We're doing this together. And really the story goes that he picked it up. And then he told him what would happen. Like, they're going to do to you what they did unto me. And your life's going to be a testimony. And if you're not up for that, then get out of here, because that's where you're at. And I think those are loving words. Like, if you don't want what's coming to me, then you better go. Because it's coming to you if you're following in what this is. And that's how it works. Now, here's what I have been saying often for a while now. One crucifixion is enough. So it's not like we're a movement leading to a crucifixion. It's been done. So consider it was done as a sacrifice, as something that did pay for a whole lot of sins. But the way I look at that is it was done for all. I mean, if you're going to do something, I like that God would say, well, if I'm going to do a sacrifice, I'm going to do it for once and for all time, for everyone. And we're in that movement. You know, we're picking up in the transcendence. Like, where did it lead? It didn't stop with the crucifixion. But some places make it that, like that's the main significance. Like, look at the crucifixion. Look what he did. He died for our sins. And I don't have denial for that. I just look at it like, well, let's look what else went with that, like something like, and now your sins are forgiven. And the price has been paid, so act like it. Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. Act like you've been forgiven. And to that measure, forgive. We're in that movement. And where did it lead? It led into ascendance. So in the story, it's a supernatural story. Maybe it's a superhero story or something, and it needs CGI effects to really tell it appropriately. But what happened at the ascension? Jared called a family reunion last September in Jerusalem. Did anybody go? See, there's some more people in the room. You were there. You know, I think he checked into the hotel and then he checked out. And he was there for about 4 weeks or something like that. So once he got into the hotel, he didn't leave. He did make an appearance with the group a couple times. You saw, those of you who were there. But it was almost like, what is he doing here for 4 weeks if he's just going to check into a hotel room? I told you, a family reunion. And, you know, when was it? It was like, by the time he left, it was less than a month before he would pass. And of course, I was wondering, will he even be able to get on the plane? But this guy, Jesus Garcia, I think most of you know him as Jared's caretaker, and myself, and he was involved in organizing it and all that, thank you. And I was just involved in showing up, thank you, with a few of our family here. And I just wondered, well, what is this? And I went, oh my God, you know, I thought he might go when he was over there. And I brought a document that had to do, if he couldn't answer for himself for his caretaking in a hospital. I said, well, see, I'm named here. I brought it. And I knew JC was named and Nathaniel, and okay. But I brought it just in case. I made sure I had that with me. Lee knows. Because I thought I might be called into it. Well, I was close. But I just looked at that he was doing something demonstrating like where he came from and where he wanted to pass or what he wanted to do as kind of a last act. That's my view now. It's like, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. And somehow he got there. And I haven't talked about this too much. I don't even know if I've said this publicly. But here goes. I have to. Jared did that to me a lot. What's going on now? So Lee and I, first we knew about plans for MSI work after the group gathering in Jerusalem. So the first part of September was the group gathering, and that ended around the 17th or 16th of September. And then we had plans, and we had MSI work in Switzerland, and then London, and then a travel agent who was handling everything said, oh, well, you know, the main group, meaning the JR group, coming back on the 30th of September. And it's like, what? Or the 29th or something like that. So I just said, well, look, I want to be there on Jared's birthday, so I'm going to come back from London. So we made arrangements to come back. He still stayed in his room. Do you understand? I don't think he ever came out of the room, except a couple times. And I checked this. So maybe Chase, who's watching this at some point, or Nathaniel, and they know, but I think he basically stayed in his room, other than he came a couple times to be with the group for a very brief amount of time. So when we came back, as it turned out, when the so-called JR group was going back, they had a night flight, and then Lee and I had a flight the next afternoon, about 12 hours later after their flight. And then there was a group of maybe 10, 12 people going to the airport, and we were staying the night in the hotel where JR had been the whole time. And, you know, we went down to kind of see them off. And unusually, I mean, this is really rare, JR was by himself on the sidewalk in a wheelchair. And then the rest of the group was up on the bus, and then JC was running around, I guess, finishing whatever needed to be done before they would go to the airport. So I was like, oh, JR's just by himself on the sidewalk. So Lee and I went over, and I did something I did many times over the years, and then particularly in the last several years, I just kind of went down, and JR didn't have his eyes open. So I leaned down, and I just said, JR, it's John, because sometimes I needed to do that because of where he might be in the universe. And, you know, he looked up, and I said, how are you? And he kind of shook his head. And, you know, and I said some things about, well, any way I can help, and, you know, anything I can do, I want to do that. And he said, I'm dying. And those are the last words he spoke to me. And then Lee leaned down, and I watched him give her the Twaji. You know, he looked at her, the gaze of God. That's how I'll put it to you. What's the Twaji? Gaze of God. And then I kind of went into some kind of a mini freak out inside of me, because I thought, when? like now, or do we take you to the hospital? Do I get on the plane with you? But I'm doing all this internally, you know, with guidance and just really looking for spirit direction, which is right on, because basically he was doing something very holy and sacred with Lee, and I didn't even want to interrupt any part of that. But I quickly got the direction. Relax. There's no urgency. There's nothing to do. It's taken care of. Like, stay with what you're doing, you know. And it did relax me, like immediately. But there was still, I have a mind like you have a mind, and my mind knows how to do doubt, knows how to do questioning, you know. So it was doing a version of that. But the reality is I knew it's good. And I was blessed with the calm. I was also kind of stunned, if you can imagine that part of it. And then there was just a really I don't know what to call it. Whatever that is, when you think, well, maybe I'm seeing him for the last time. But in any case, it was beautiful. That's mostly what I'm wanting to tell you. Like, you put the equal sign on it, it's just beautiful. And I did see him again. And I think I did share this with those of you on the morning when he passed, that I showed up at Prana, and I talked as a few others did within the hours of when it happened. I did talk about that passing, and it was magnificent. So essentially, just maybe to restate it, that the presidency, who I already talked about, then Jesu and Nathaniel, who I already talked about, myself, and I call her Nurse Nancy, who was one of the nurses that had been assigned to Jer in the last several months prior to that. And she was over in Israel the whole time as one of two nurses that were attending to him physically. But we were there for close to 3 days. And then the hospital staff basically had prepared us, for pulling the breathing tube, whatever that's called. That he would no longer be on some mechanized breathing. That, well, this might be it. It's like, okay. And then we were there for that moment, and they prepared us like it could be quick. Well, that went on for basically almost 3 more days. So that was on a Monday morning, and then it was Wednesday morning when it finally happened. And at that point, we were all around him, and it was a piece of cake. There was no struggle. And even if it was, it wouldn't matter. I hope you understand that. It's not a sign of like, well, how spiritual was he? That would be decided like, was there any body struggle? Spiritual people kind of float in the air or something. I was glad on a personal level, maybe just for myself in a selfish way, that I would rather have that as my, what showed up, but I was prepared for whatever, just to be there. And we were all standing there. And we were singing MSI songs. Bashan's and Gonna Love You More This Day. And I don't remember all of them. But somebody would remember something and just start singing. And part of my experience is just how the family showed up spiritually. So that's part of what's really beautiful, is to experience it as we were there. And some of you have told me how you were there. I heard someone tonight tell me once more of their experience, and I've had quite a few people tell me. And it's not, again, a sign like, well, if you're really spiritual, then you would have been awoke at, 2:18 or whatever the time was. That's not what it is. But what it is that there's a loving for who the man is that John Roger expressed in his life. And thank you. I experienced it in this room. And to me, that's what it's about when we got that order to love one another. That it's about this loving, that what a few of us were doing for John Roger. I understand that, my view is you would all do that. That's how I see it. They would all do it in our love. We would have stood there. We would have stood there for days. And it was kind of like that. It was like cabin fever amplified, because we really didn't know, the moment. So we just stayed on a round-the-clock watch through that time period. And then can you imagine what people do when they're in the same room for hour after hour, and then it becomes days? It's something. It's punchy, and you start talking about all kinds of stuff. And for me, that was part of it. That whatever was going on in that meeting, that when I, in my agitated way, said, we need to love one another, that, my experience is we got to that, and Jer insisted on it before he passed. And that was part of my prayer. And I'm just now putting those two pieces together. That it was a prayer, it went out, and it was answered. And when it was answered, there was a great blessing. And the way I see this movement, if you're just picking up like you're a new person, you're going, well, I don't think I was prepared for this tonight. I thought there was going to be like an introduction and a lecture, and then in 45 minutes it would be done. Well, maybe. But, there is a fellowship here that I experience, that we get close. And sometimes that's what scares people, that the closest, the intimacy that we are called into. Like no man has a greater love than he would lay down his life for his brother. And so if we go back, and it's not just Jesus, but if we go back to what that is, then there were brothers who were demonstrating that. They laid their life down, and they set in something that prepared the way for what we're in now. And I just like to see it that, you know, it's much easier. So it's a much easier walk now to step into what we're doing. That is a Christ movement, you know, movement of the beloved. But it is a movement where we're called in to do this, and even greater. So that's where I see we are right now with Jared's passing, is that we're doing the greater. I'm not saying it wasn't already here. I look at John Roger bringing forward the greater in his ministry, that he did it. And I see that more than ever. And part of it is that we have here present the keys into the heart of God. Baruch Bashan.
See so much deeper into me than I know. Won't you show me? Won't you show me? Just let go. Then you'll know. Take me high, take me in, take me where I can begin to be closer to thee, closer to thee. Just be now, then you'll know how. I feel the changes inside. Something is moving, never was moving before. Somehow I'm sure that it's you, and I want more of you. Just walk.